Hello, my name is Charlene Garcia Sims, and I'm the Genealogy and Special Collections Librarians here at Rawlings Library. We're having several programs for Hispanic Heritage Month, and this is one of them. Today, we are going to pay tribute to a great author, Rudolfa Anaya, known as the godfather of Chicano literature. We were very saddened to hear of his death on June 28, 2020. He died in Albuquerque at the age of 82. I looked up the definition of tribute, and it is an act, statement, or gift that is intended to show gratitude, respect, or admiration. Today, with the help of well-known author from Denver, Angel Vigil, we are going to have a conversation about Rudolfo and why he deserves this gift from us that shows our gratitude, respect, and admiration, and it will be recorded for our archives. I'm real excited about that. First of all, I'd like to introduce Angel Vigil. Angel is retired chairman of the Fine and Performing Arts Department and director of drama at Colorado Academy in Denver. He is an award-winning author, performer, stage director, and teacher. Last month, we had Angel do 2 presentations on 2 of his books, Corn Woman and Una Linda Raza, Cultural and Artistic Traditions of the Hispanic Southwest, with a focus on mural. We had him do a focus on his chapter on murals. And lo and behold, the foreword to Una Linda Raza was by Rudolfa Anaya. I told Angel that the library wanted to do a tribute to Rudolfo in September and asked him if he would like to help with the tribute. Angel immediately said yes. So welcome back to Pueblo, Angel.
Thank you so much. I love anything to do with Pueblo. I've over the years spent a lot of time coming to Pueblo to do presentations at the library or at schools. And now it's all online, so I'm glad to still be part of the work of the library and down in Pueblo. So thank you so much for inviting me again.
You're welcome. And thank you for accepting to do this. Angel told me he wanted to do some more research on Rudolfo than what he already knew. So I'd like to start this tribute with you, Angel. Will you tell us what your research revealed about Rudolfo Anaya, the man, and then Rudolfo Anaya, the author? And did you find anything that surprised you?
You know, yes, I did find a lot that surprised me. One of the reasons when you, myself or anyone, when you approach an icon, the reputation of the icon kind of blurs that they're just a regular person. Because when they're famous, 2, you admire them so much, and 3, they've affected your life so much, whether they're musicians, whether they're like Rudolfo, whether they're an author. So you have I call it an artificial relationship with someone who's actually famous and well-known and accomplished. And then that icon artificial relationship tends to dominate. And what I enjoy quite a bit, if I get the opportunity like I have now with Rudolfo, is kind of peeking behind the curtain and seeing who the real person was. One of the beautiful aspects about Rudolfo is he was a very open person. He's very kind, he's very sharing, he was tremendously supportive of younger authors like myself when we were coming up. And then so every time I had an encounter with him, I always tell people, they say, what was Rudolfo like? And I said, well, he was like my Uncle Tony or my Uncle Dickie or my Uncle Frankie, you know, he was like one of my uncles, a very warm person immediately, a very open person immediately. So I appreciated that about his persona, even though it was clear he had a public life, In my research about him, and then my research really consisted of reading his books some more, kind of understanding the author. An author will always say, well, if you want to know about me, just read my books. If you read my books, you'll find out a lot about me. The other idea is, and you shared this with me, I read several times. In fact, I reread it again today in preparation for this talk. The autobiography that he wrote and shared with you when he was in his 40s, and he wrote it in the 1980s. And that was revealing, and like you said, surprising, revealing about his childhood, about how he became interested in being a writer, what it was like for him to be a writer when he wasn't famous. He was just a guy writing a novel, right? So how many people are like that, right? Just a person writing a novel. All those rejection letters, and then once he had Me Ultima, and he was catapulted into worldwide fame instantaneously because of that one single book. What it was like to continue to be a writer, continue to write his other novels, continue to write a play, continue to be a public speaker. So it was interesting to read about that. And then I did something. I went on YouTube. Where else are you going to go, right? I went on YouTube and watched every single interview or YouTube little video about him. And I recommend anyone to do that. Rudolfo Anaya, YouTube, a lot of stuff's going to come up. Some of them are actually him talking and speaking. Some of them are him being interviewed. Some of them are people talk like you and me, Charlene, talking about him. So there's a lot of material available now about who he was as a person. I appreciated finding out about how he grew up. And then what was surprising to me is how our lives overlapped a little bit. A friend of mine, I was telling you, Tony Ortega, a very well-known visual artist up here in Denver, that when I told him about doing this work on Rudolfo and I, he said, yeah, his family lived right down the Pecos River from where my family was. So he felt a real connection, knowledge of his family in New Mexico. I was born and raised in Albuquerque. So when he said he went, his family moved to Albuquerque and they moved into the Bareilles neighborhood, which was the Hispanic barrio, a long time, generations long. My family has lived in the Bareilles neighborhood. I grew up in the Bareilles neighborhood on 3rd Street, 16, I think the address was 1621 3rd Street. On that neighborhood, there are like 7 Vigil families living in that one block, and I think we're all related in one way or another. So just those, the icon, the famous person, and then having access and learning more about who he was as a person and as a writer, and then something that was extremely important to him as a spokesperson for the heritage and life of Chicano culture, and he called it Chicano culture. He didn't call it Hispanic culture, called it Chicano culture. So all that was really fun to find out about someone that I admired so much from a distance. And in my conversations with him, got a little glimpse about what a warm person he was, and then finding out more background about what his life actually was.
Thank you. And I'm assuming that our audience knows what Chicano means and what Chicano literature is, but maybe not everyone does. Can you explain those two terms?
I definitely can explain those terms. One of the reasons is I wrote a full chapter about all those terms. In my book, Una Linda Raza, one of the chapters is, what do you call yourself and how come? And I always tell people, well, if you get confused about what to call someone, just ask him, how do you refer to yourself? And then I'll line up with that. I'll call you what you like to be called. I always rely, I always got a big kick in that. There used to be a golfer named Lee Trevino, and during his day, he was a very famous golfer. And then he started winning a lot, and he started having money, basically, started having money. And people ask him, well, what's it like to be rich now? And he says, oh, I love being rich. I can stop being Mexican, and now I can start saying I'm Spanish. So I always got a big kick about how he did that. And then at the History Museum, there's a quote by someone up there. And this is kind of like how I feel about myself. It said, well, first I was Mexican, then I was Mexican American, then I was Spanish, then I was Chicano, now I'm Latin, Latino, and now you got to be Latinx. Now there's a new thing. You got to be Latinx nowadays. So get back to the question of Chicano, though, right? And then I myself use several terms. I'm perfectly fine calling myself Hispanic and being Hispanic as a word, even though some people think I'm a sellout for using the word Hispanic. My father and mother, they both referred to themselves as Spanish. I had a very long time I was active in the Chicano movement. So, of course, I call myself Chicano. Nowadays, I call myself Latino, of course. If I'm talking to young people or at a college, I refer to myself Latinx, just to try to line up with the terminology for that generation. Chicano has an interesting derivation. Here's something else. My father hated the word Chicano, did not allow it in the house. And the reason is he viewed it as a derogatory term to people of Hispanic heritage. And I couldn't be a Pachuco, and Rudolfo now writes about the Pachuco era. I couldn't wear my collar up in the house. I couldn't call myself Pachuco, couldn't call myself Chicano when I was in college. So generationally, there's a lot of conflict around the word Chicano. But Rudolfo Anaya, myself, many others claim that word as a source of pride. There's when you study the origin of words, there's a lot of different theories about it. The theory that I like to share with people is when the word Mexicano. When Anglos were trying to describe Mexicans, and they were trying to be, and that's why my father hated it so much. He knew where it came from. They didn't even bother to speak Spanish, and they actually enjoyed butchering the Spanish language. And they say, "Oh, those Mexicanos! All they do is come over and cause trouble in the United States with Mexicanos." And then the Mexicano, you can hear inside Mexicano the word Chicano. And then so Chicano person is a person shares a heritage, maybe parents born in Mexico, but lives in the United States. And then during the time of Chicano power and Chicano pride, instead of viewing it as a derogatory term, it's kind of like brown power, it's a source of cultural pride. And we took that word and transformed it into a positive word about who we are through art, through social action, through political action, through the culture that we share with people, the arts and culture. That Chicano is a source of pride now. And Rudolfa Anaya was very, very deliberate about calling himself a Chicano author. So he lined up with that because he came out of much more like myself, came out of the 50s as a child, came into adulthood in the 60s with the civil rights movement, the Chicano movement, empowered through the 70s, and then just claimed it as the term that you would use. So that's a long story about where Chicano fits in with Latino, Spanish, Mexican, Latinx, Mexican American, Spanish American, Chicano. There's a lot of terms to call a brown person like me. Ask someone what they want to be called. Rudolfo Anaya, he wanted to be called Chicano.
Okay. And Chicano literature?
Chicano literature, right? He's viewed as the godfather of Chicano literature. And then in his autobiography, he talks deliberately about writing Chicano literature, meaning writing literature and he viewed Chicanos as marginalized people in United States society. And one of the things that he was most resentful about, and that's a strong word, but if you listen to him, you can hear it, is that the lives of Chicano people are not worthy of literature. They're not worthy of being written about. And he viewed that as a cultural mistake that needed to be rectified by Chicano authors writing stories about our lives to share with people, equal to the stories that Faulkner would write about life in the South. So I think it was powerful, his view of Chicano literature, speaking about the lives of a marginalized people in United States society, that we have a voice, we have a life, it deserves to live on the stage of world literature and being shared with people. And his works prove that.
Thank you. I love that. I love that definition of Chicano literature. So when did you first encounter Rudolfo, and how? How did you first encounter his name or his works or whatever?
Well, next week we're going to talk about his books. And now we're just talking about him as a person and how he became a writer and what his formative years as a child was. But I actually have my original copy of Bless Me Ultima. And the modern copy of Bless Me Ultima is
so do I.
I got that exact one. I tell people I have the one with the white cover, not the one with all the fancy colors in the inside of it, the white cover, because I bought it, who knows when, way back when, right? Devoured it, read it, because I immediately read it and recognized myself as a child in New Mexico, because that's what he was writing about, himself growing up. In fact, he said he didn't make any people up. All he did was write about the people in his childhood, people in his family, himself, the people in his little neighborhood village where he lived and everything. So it just so, like for so many people, reading that book was like reading about myself. So I like that he wrote that book quite a bit.
So my next question was, how did it feel to find the book, to find this book that wrote about
well, you know what?
us?
I don't even remember how I found it, other than I'd found it and I'd already read it and recognized myself and everything. It was so long ago, it's lost in the fog of memory. Don't remember how I came upon it. But I do remember the first time I met him. And the thing I was so impressed about was what a gentleman he was. And I viewed it, for the moment, it kind of pulled me back a little bit. But it was illustrated to me and it revealed so much about him. I was on a panel here in Denver for Chicano authors. And then so myself and the only three people that I think counted on the panel, one of them seems egotistical, but Rudolfo, myself, and there were 4 or 5 other people, of course, but I don't even remember who they were because all I paid attention were 3 people. Myself, what I was going to say, Rudolfo was on the panel, and this was he was sitting like right next to me. This was the first time I'd actually met him in person. And then she was
Olibama.
Olibama. This picture of her as a young person. And another person, a significant writer of the history of the San Luis people, San Luis Valley people. So the 3 of us and a couple of other people were on the panel. And the moderator was doing moderating. And Rudolfa Anaya clearly was the most famous person sitting at the table, right? The rest of us were minor regional authors, if you want to describe us that way. He was a world famous person already. But we're all talking here at some sort of panel at a book fair. There's a large book fair here in Denver, and there's a panel about Chicano authors. I was one of them. And then so the moderator immediately, it's like pretend none of us are at the panel. For the moderator, there's only one person at the table, Rudolfo Anaya. So the moderator looked at Rudolfo and pitched the first question to Rudolfo and asked him to start talking. And without skipping a beat, Rudolfo just very quietly introduced Olibama and said, she's truly the elder writer at the table and the person we should all look up to. And I'm going to give my moment to her, and she can be the first one to talk about what it's like to be a writer about people of Hispanic descent in Colorado. That personal awareness and gesture and kindness to an elder of our community, to me, revealed everything I needed to know about him. And what a wonderful person he was.
I was there, but I hadn't met you yet.
I was hard too. Do you remember that moment when he could get David over to Olibama? It was a wonderful moment.
Mm-hmm. I do. So why is Bless Me Ultima such a great book, and why is it known for setting the canon for Chicano literature?
Well, one of the reasons it's a great book is people can see themselves in it. All great literature, and I've taught writing to adults. That's the only thing I can call the classes I've taught about how to be a writer. And then what they always say is they tell people, especially beginning writers, write what you know about, right? Don't try to write about something you don't know about, write what you know about. And then I would always tell people, write what you know about and be as specific as you can. And I said in a real topsy-turvy way, if you write really specifically, in some way, it becomes universal. People will be able to identify themselves with something specific you mentioned. And that's the story of Bless Me Ultima. He writes about people. He writes about the land. He writes about work. He writes about food. He writes about church. He writes about magic. He writes about superstition. He writes about the way a little kid sees the world. So people immediately saw themselves in that story and said, oh, I've had that feeling. Oh, I've had that moment. Oh, I know a person exactly like that person he's describing right now. So that the power of identification with a story through a novel, through literature, is what makes a novel jump into world consciousness. And everyone wants to read it because they recognize themselves in it. So I think that's the most important thing about it. The other thing about it is it was the first book to go big that could be described as Chicano literature. Of course, there's been all sorts of writers writing different books and everything. But that, for some reason, and this is the magic of the moment. There's no other way to describe it. The magic of the moment. The right book at the right time for the right zeitgeist, the mind of the universe at that moment. Bless Me Ultima was that one book. And honestly, if he only wrote, like the guy that wrote Catcher in the Rye, only wrote one book, he only needed to write one book, right? That one book told all he needed to say. If Rudolfo had never written the other book, we'd still be talking because of the power of Bless Me Ultima. So people's identification with the story made it powerful. That's why people loved it. That's why people recommended it to other people. Oh, you got to read this book. And then the other thing is the right book at the right time, the first book to break through and really be the first book that sold a lot of copies about Chicano people in our part of the world, New Mexico.
Thank you. And next week we'll talk about the importance of Chicano literature. But do you think Bless Me Ultima will continue to live on not only in Chicano literature but world literature? Because it's translated into how many languages? At least 12 languages.
You know what? This is the thing about books. And even I've written 6 books, and even my publisher told me, enjoy your time on the big stage, because one day your time will be over and then it'll be someone else's time. Because he said, books just have a lifespan. They go like this and then they go away. And what happens is because people are always searching for the new, right? Always looking for the new. And they'll say, well, that was a good book then, but now I'm looking for the new next book. And he told me, as a publisher, we'll probably sell a lot of your books, but once we've sold all your books, we probably won't be interested in you very much because we're looking for the next big seller. And he says, you got to keep that in mind and not take it personal. Just call the business of books. However, every now and then there's a book that keeps being reprinted. And Charlene, I know you had a publishing company of yourself. I think you printed her book 4 times already, right?
Correct.
So some books, her book, she only wrote 1 book, but that's all she needed, 1 book. It's still in print. You republished it 4 times because it keeps selling. People keep wanting to buy it. So that's why publishers will keep reprinting a book. So Bless Me Ultima, still in print, still being reprinted because it's still selling because people still want to read about it. Some books go away. Some books, they're still on the bookshelf, and you can still order them and buy them and everything. So I think that's one of the sustaining powers of a specific book, because of course his most famous book, Bless Me Ultima, is that it's still in print and it's still being sold and people are still reading it decades after he wrote it, right? And that's the power of the book. That's why it's such a special book.
Okay. Thank you, Angel.
Charlene, it sounds like that was the end of the talk. Thank you. But what I want to do is pitch it back to you, because you shared with me a powerful set of experiences you had, Rudolfo, when you and your husband Ed brought Rudolfo to Pueblo, and he ended up speaking to 2,000 people in the Pueblo area there. That's a lot of people to talk to. And then when I was reading your report of it, what touched me so much is your own experiences of him as a person, not just the icon or the famous writer, and some of the comic exchanges you had with him. And you mentioned to me more than once that he was just funny. He had a light-hearted personality, and you enjoyed that quite a bit about him. So I'd love it if you would share your experiences with him when you brought him to Pueblo.
Thank you. I became a groupie of Rudolfo when I first read Bless Me Ultima. It was such a different experience for me to read about people that were like me. So I hadn't met him, but in the summer of 1993, in the Pueblo Chieftain, there was an announcement that he was going to present at Adams State College. And so, boy, I signed up right away. And so I went to Adams State College to listen to him. And I asked him, would you be interested in coming to Pueblo? And he said, yes. So a few months later, he sent me his vitae and his autobiography. And I was, and it's really funny because he would just put Charlene on the outside of the envelope, And
I love that story. Just write Charlene Pueblo, and it still get to you.
Yeah. So then I went to the Rocky Mountain Book Festival, what we're talking about earlier. And he really didn't acknowledge me. And so I said, you know what, this man's going to remember me in a year. I'm going to get to know this man. And that was, so in February, I received a flyer from him. Again, it just said Charlene on the outside of the envelope. And he was telling me that it was a flyer that said that Warner Publishing was going to publish his Bless Me Ultima in hardback. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and call him because he keeps sending me this stuff and no notes. Let's see what we can arrange. So I called him, and I thought I was going to have to go through a pool of secretaries, but he answered the phone. And we talked about him coming to Pueblo, and he said that he thought September the 16th for Mexican Independence Day of '94 would be the best time. And we talked about, just a few things. And then I asked him at the end, what's your prize? And he said $3,000. And I said, sure. I said, of course, no problem. Well, I didn't have a penny. And Ed and I, my husband Ed and I, we were willing to pay for him, but not really. We thought he's such a great author. We were going to find money. So Dr. Luis Torres from the university, and Ted Bueno from the school district, and Gil Romero, school representative, and Dr. Leroy Martinez, he was the principal at Risley, and others. I started collecting all this money, and in fact. I had to turn down a school district, a TV station, and a radio station, and this library. They all wanted him, but he could only present to so many. So, and I had told him, he told me, well, how many people do you think I'll be presenting to? And I said, about 200, and then, and so I started telling people, Rudolfa Anaya is coming into town, and some people didn't know him. So I vowed that more than 1,000 people were going to know Rudolfo by the time, he was gone. So my husband went and picked him up at the airport in Colorado Springs on the 15th. And he was just kind of waiting out there, Ed said, and he was kind of like hitching a ride. So we always kidded him, and we didn't know if he was the real Rudolfo. So he got into town, and, we took him to where he was going to stay. And then we went over to Keating School, where he presented to 400 students. And 120 of them were at risk. It was kind of an alternative school. And he started with Buenos Dias. And he had him in his hand. And he just knew the audience. Then we went on to Pueblo Community College for them to film a conversation with Rudolfo. And when he finished recording, we were out in the parking lot, and he said he was ready for a beer. So we went to the Irish pub, where we heard of his travels all over the world, including Egypt. And oh my God, it was just, I couldn't believe I was sitting with this man talking to him. So we had dinner with Rodolfo at the Renaissance. I just put it out there and said, 50 people, first come, first serve. And when we walked into the Renaissance restaurant, he just went talking to everybody from table to table. 50 people, he touched each one of them individually, and women were charmed by him, and men respected him. And he started calling me his Pueblo agent. And he said that the reason he came is because his wife told him, you better go so this crazy woman will stop calling. So I thank his wife, Patricia, for doing that. So on Friday, September 16th, which is Mexican Independence Day, Rodolfo presented at Risley Middle School to 750 middle schoolers and some fifth graders. And Dr. Leroy Martinez was a principal, and he just treated him like royalty. And he began again with Buenos Dias. And I guess kids hadn't heard speakers say that. And so they were just enthralled. And he had each child write their fears on a piece of paper. And he told them that he would take their fears and burn them at the annual, I think it was Kukui Festival.
The Kukui Festival, yeah.
In Albuquerque. And so every kid wrote their fears, and he did take them with him. We then went to Hogue Hall at the university, and that holds 600 people. Well, there was such an overflow with people standing and sitting on the aisles. And by this time, he was pretty tired. He went out to the balcony and took some deep breaths. And this presentations took a lot out of him. But by the time he was introduced, this energy just, oh my God, you could just see all this energy. And he always requested a Pepsi and an apple at the podium. So he had his Pepsi and his apple. And again, he started Buenos Dias, and he got a standing ovation. Dr. Luis Torres introduced Mario Medina, one of his students, and Mario introduced Rodolfo, and he got a standing ovation. And he talked about, the theme of his speech was to not leave your culture at the doorstep, and no child should leave their culture at the doorstep. And when it was over, he signed for 1.5 hours. And all in all, he spoke to over 2,000 people in Pueblo. And so we finally headed out to Denver to take him because he had to be there that evening. And as we were going through Fountain, I remember him telling me, Charlene, that looks like a junior high over there. Do you want me to stop and present there? And he was funny. And so the sun was going down, and he told me the most special thing. He told me that this was the saddest time of day for him, but the most beautiful. And he shared that when he was a teenager, there were no swimming pools for Hispanic kids. There were swimming holes, and he jumped into one and he hurt himself really badly. He had to be in a cast for a year. And so one of his books, Tortuga, he wrote about his experience being in a cast, and then there was a Tortuga mountain surrounding it. But he said that every day, as the sun was setting, he would look out and he would become very sad, but he would become very happy because of the beauty of the sunset. And I just, oh my God, I wanted to cry because he was sharing this with me. But then all of a sudden he said, I feel like a beer. So I told him, well, what about some sake and sushi at Maury's in Denver? And so we had our own dinner with Rudolfo, and he was very funny. And he didn't order sushi; he ordered caldo, a soup. And he said that caldos were the most nourishing, in his childhood with his mother and grandmother. And then he took out a piece of paper and he wrote on it, and it was a contract that said, next time Rudolfo comes to Pueblo, he will only speak to 200 people. So I still have that piece of paper somewhere. Then we took him to the executive towers for a Chicano conference that he was going to be attending the next day. Well, there was Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez, and they made eye contact across the room. And he walked across the room and they embraced. And it's like, where's your camera when you need it? We said our goodbyes and we melted into the woodwork, and he went on, to other people that needed him. They just embraced him everywhere we went. Now his recording for that day at Polk Hall is on our website right now. If you want, go to our website, you will see it, and you can click on it, and it'll give you a link to listen to it. And there's some pictures of the dinner at the Renaissance. But it was two of the most wonderful days of my life, and I will never forget them. And for those 2,000 people that he saw, and all the people didn't have just one book, but they had 5 books for him to sign. So they have those signatures, and we were very fortunate to have him here in 1994. So thank you for asking.
No, I just love those stories because when they reveal what life is like around a famous person, everyone wants access to them and everything. But you had personal time with him and got a sense about him and what he was like as a person. Those are the memories you carry around in your heart, actually, about him. The thing of you calling him up and everything, because he and I had crossed paths several times and had light conversations and everything. And then found his phone number, gave him a call and told him I'm writing this book. And he was very supportive that I was a young writer and that I should keep going. He's always told me that. And then so I was writing this book, and then I told my author, I told my publisher, I said, boy, you know what I love? I love Rudolfo Anaya, and I had write the forward to this book. So the publisher said, the only one way to make that happen, call him up and ask him. Same thing. Hey, Rudolfo, there's Angel up here in Denver. Would you write a forward for my book? Yeah, I shall write that forward. And I told the publisher, guys, my name's in big letters and Rudolfo's in tiny letters underneath like this. And I told the publisher, why don't you flip that? Put my name in small letters, put his name in big letters, forward by it, and then put Rudolfo and I real big. And I told the publisher, we'll sell more copies with his name big.
Oh, that's really funny. So there have been many tributes to Rudolfo, and they can be found on several websites. And you can also hear him in many interviews like you were talking. But what was the reoccurring theme in his interviews and presentations that you saw?
This was in listening to him, because interviewers, they just ask him a bunch of questions, right? But if you listen to a lot of those interviews, thematically, the same points keep rising up. And he probably had standard answers. He's been asked questions 1,000 times. He's got the answer all figured out and everything. But if you listen to several of the interviews, again, you begin to get a sense of him as a person. Had a very soft presentational manner, very quiet, not aggressive, didn't gesture a lot and everything. He would just talk a little bit. The importance of culture is what he would talk about. The importance of culture, the importance about remembering culture, the importance of sharing culture. I remember one of his quotes one time. Someone asked him about, well, there's too much about culture. Would you keep the big stuff and all the small stuff? If it passes away, then that doesn't matter at all. And then he said, I always remember this too. He said, "There's nothing about culture that is too small that's not worth keeping alive." And so the idea that he would think every single, even the smallest little parts are representative of culture. So one of my takeaways from listening to a lot of his interviews is the importance of culture, and that's why he viewed himself as a Chicano author, writing about Chicano culture through his gift, the gift of literature. And the other thing, then he keeps turning back to the verities we want to talk about him: family, land, and people, right? And the acts of culture, the things you do about culture. And so I view that as what he viewed important about his view, his world of the view of the world, his place in the world, what he wanted to share about. So I would have come back to this idea of Chicano culture. That was what was important about him. And that's what he liked talking about too. And like what you said about the overlap about children, because Bless Me Ultima is about a little boy. So he didn't write it about himself as an adult. He chose to write about himself as a little boy, how the little boy experienced the magical life of here on earth, and how the coming of age story, Bless Me Ultima, was about. And then so that overlap with education, young people, culture, passing on culture, the role of elders to keep culture alive. You listen to him, that's what you're going to hear over and over and over and over again.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to read something from journalist Dean Hansen from the Albuquerque Journal. Rudolfo Anaya's stories touch the very soul of the Mexican Chicano experience. Now we find the dry, arid, blowing, whistling winds of Albuquerque have descended into silence. The splendid landscape with all its sun-baked colors seem a little less bright. The favorite son of the Southwest has no more words, but his legacy as an author will last an eternity. The words of great authors, Hemingway, Faulkner, Morrison, Baldwin, Angelou, Anaya, and others will never leave our earth so long as the written word is cherished by those who desire to read a sentence, a paragraph, a page, a book, with a mastery of language, giving pleasure in the heart with words that touch our ever-inquiring mind. I love that. Do you have anything else to add, Angel? Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you for asking me. Now, this has been personal remembrances of two people that knew Rudolfo Anaya, worked with Rudolfo Anaya, did projects with Rudolfo Anaya. So just to kind of reveal our experience of him as a person, not just as how I started with the famous icon, the godfather of Chicano literature, but who he really was as a person and why so many people love him. The last thing I want to say is we'll see you next week, because we're going to talk about what Rudolfo would want us to talk about, which is his books, especially Bless Me Ultima.
Yes, thank you. So we are grateful to you, Rodolfo, and we will always respect and admire what you left us. I'd like to invite you next week at this time, 5 p.m., Thursday, October 1st, as we present part 2 in this tribute. And Angel and I will be discussing Rodolfo's many books, their themes and symbolism. We will also point out the importance of people of different ethnicities writing their stories and finding an avenue to get them published. It is past time that big publishing companies take time to look at these books as part of the American experience, with stories that need to be told so we have the complete story of this country that includes everyone. Please join us next week, and thank you again, Angel.
Thank you very much. We'll see all of you next week. Talk about Bless Me Ultima and the literature of Rudolfo Anaya. Thank you very much, Charlene, for inviting me to be part of this tribute to Rudolfo Anaya.